Hi, my name's Rin. I'm a math nerd who loves God. If that's not your vibe, no worries. Keep scrolling. Have a great day. If it is your vibe, what's up? Um, I've been thinking about two-step equations, partially because I've been teaching them lately. But two-step equations are funny because they come right after one-step equations, which is like x plus 4 equals 5. Um, and one-step equations, students are really quick with. They're like, oh, they added something. How do you undo addition? You subtract, so let's subtract from both sides, and we find out that x equals 1. Super easy, one step, and we're done. But then two-step equations throw almost everyone for a loop. Because suddenly we're not just looking... It's a tiny bit more complex. We have two operations going on, which is why it's a two-step equation. But we're also not just looking at x anymore, we're looking at an entire math sentence. And that feels harder. It is harder. And for most students, one of the first things that they'll do is they'll say, okay, well, I want to solve x, so let's look at what's happening to x. Well, the first thing that's next to x is this 3. I know that in the middle there's multiplication here, so let's undo that multiplication by dividing everything by 3. And then when we do that, we get x plus 7/3 equals 3. And then they look at this and they see that there's a fraction and they assume that they did something wrong because they're like, oh no, fractions mean you're way off the mark, which isn't true. This is mathematically correct. It just looks kind of ugly. And so they're like, well, I don't know what to do from here. Like, it's too complicated now. Now there's fractions. I don't know what to do. Which is totally fair. We can keep going from here. It's harder if you do it in this order. But we can subtract 7/3 from both sides. And then we get x equals, let's see, 3 is the same as 3/1. In terms of thirds, we need to find a common denominator. So this is 9/3, which we already knew because we did that earlier. But anyway, so we have 9/3 minus 7/3. So x is 2/3. You can do it that way, but it is harder, and you have to do this little sidebar of like, well, but what's the common denominator and all the things. It is harder, and that feels discouraging. But it's not wrong. It's just not the most efficient way to do things. The most efficient way to solve this problem. So what was our problem? It was 3x plus 7 equals 9. The most efficient way to solve this problem is to, instead of looking at what's directly connected to x, look at the whole sentence, the whole math sentence, and see what part is the easiest to separate. The easiest part is actually what's not connected to x, which is different from when we're doing one-step equations and we're focusing on x so much. But here, this plus 7 doesn't have a care in the world. It's not attached to anything. We can easily subtract 7 from both sides. And then we get 3x equals 2. And then we divide by 3, and we arrive at the same answer. And so it's still true in this case that x is 2/3, but one way was a lot harder than the other way. And I think it's really cool that God knows the difference. He knows who of us is going through a harder time. He knows the easier way to do things, and he's given us commandments and scriptures and prophets and leaders to help us do things the easier way. But he loves us enough to let us do things the more complicated way. But either way, as long as we do things correctly, or as long as equality is achieved in this case, we can still get to the right answer, and when we're never lost from him. And that just reminds me of a couple of things. One, it reminds me of the story of the prodigal son, that he tried so many things, and he thought he was so lost. And yet, when his father saw him coming back to the house, he said, "For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to be merry. He was so excited. He's like, look, you took the harder path for sure, but you're still my son, and I love you, and let's celebrate. And it also reminds me of this quote from President Jeffrey R. Holland. And he says, however many mistakes you feel you have made, or talents you think you don't have, or however far from home and family and God you feel you have traveled, I testify that you have not traveled beyond the reach of divine love. It is not possible for you to sink lower than the infinite light of Christ's atonement shines. And I just love that. I love that no matter what the problem, whether it's a two-step equation or a quadratic equation or however complex as you want to go, there's always a way back. There's always a way to the answer. And you can do some funky things and make the problem harder by not doing it in the most efficient way. But you still learn along the way, and either way, you end up at your answer and you find truth. And I find great comfort knowing that no matter what path I take, as long as I turn to Christ, I'm going to learn, and it's going to be a good path. I might not always do things the best, and I definitely make mistakes, but I can always turn to him, and he can always help me turn around. In this case, if we had divided by 3, and we're looking at this saying, all right, we have fractions now, this is too complicated, and actually, I should actually divide it by 3. It's okay to say, hey, that looks too complicated. I don't know that I can do fractions right now. And what's nice in math is you can just undo that. You could say, oh, I don't want to divide. Let's just multiply everything times 3. And we'll go back to how it was. So 3 times 3 is 9. 7/3 times 3. The 3 will cancel, so we get 7. 3 times x is 3x. And we can start again. And I think that's so beautiful that there are inverses that... like repenting and using the atonement, we could always go back and try again. And I'm just so very grateful for that. And anyway, those are my thoughts. Hope you have a happy Sunday. Bye.